The day Margaret Thornton appeared on national news as the HOA Karen who attacked PTSD veterans, I was in my workshop helping Sergeant Marcus rebuild a bookshelf, his first woodworking project since losing his leg in Fallujah. 6 months earlier, Margaret had called my workshop an illegal commercial operation and demanded I shut it down within 30 days. What she didn't know was that I'm a Veterans Affairs Vocational Rehabilitation Specialist, that my workshop is a federally protected therapy program, and that the 12 combat veterans she was threatening to displace included 2 Purple Heart recipients and a Medal of Honor nominee. By the time CNN finished interviewing veterans about the HOA Karen attacking their PTSD treatment, Margaret would be facing federal charges, a $50,000 VA fine, and becoming the most hated woman in Texas. But let me take you back to where this war really started. 6 months ago, on a humid Tuesday morning in Cedar Springs, Texas, when Margaret Thornton stood in my driveway with her clipboard and her designer yoga pants and told me I had 30 days to shut down my illegal commercial woodworking business, while behind her, in my workshop, Staff Sergeant David Martinez was learning to control his hands that hadn't stopped shaking since Kandahar. If you want to see what happens when an HOA Karen attacks wounded warriors, hit that subscribe button right now. What would you do if someone tried to shut down a therapy program helping combat veterans with PTSD? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because this story proves that some battles don't end when soldiers come home. My name is James Sullivan. I'm 51 years old, and I've been a Veterans Affairs Vocational Rehabilitation Specialist for 19 years. I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, where serving your country wasn't political. It was just what you did. I enlisted in 1991 when the Gulf War started, served 12 years, including 2 tours in Desert Storm and 1 in Bosnia, saw things I still don't talk about, lost friends whose names are carved into memorials nobody visits anymore. When I left the Army in 1998, I was struggling, couldn't hold civilian jobs, had anger issues I didn't recognize as PTSD. A VA counselor convinced me to enroll in their vocational rehabilitation program, which saved my life. By 2002, I had my social work degree and was working for the VA in Fort Worth, helping other veterans find their way home. For years, I ran standard programs, resume workshops, job fairs, computer training. Important work, but incomplete. I'd watch combat veterans sit through PowerPoint presentations about interview skills while their legs bounced with anxiety and their eyes darted toward exits. They were trying, but you could see the disconnection, the way their minds kept pulling them back to deployment. These veterans needed something different than classroom training. That's when I started thinking about my father's workshop. My dad, Robert Sullivan, was a carpenter for 40 years in Tennessee. That workshop was his sanctuary. I spent half my childhood there, Saturday mornings waking to the sound of his table saw, smell of fresh-cut pine drifting through the house. He taught me everything: how to read wood grain, measure twice and cut once, sand until your fingers felt the smoothness before your eyes could see it. The real lessons weren't about carpentry. They were about life. I remember when I was 14, struggling in school, failing algebra, getting into fights. My dad handed me a piece of oak and asked me to make a cutting board. I screwed it up, cut the pieces wrong, wasted half the wood, got frustrated and threw a chisel across the shop. My dad picked up the chisel, examined it for damage, then sat down on his workbench. "You know why I come out here every night after work?" he asked. I shrugged. "Because you like building stuff. I come out here because when your mind's too loud, your hands need something to do. Wood doesn't judge you, doesn't rush you. You make a mistake, you learn from it, and keep going. That's therapy you can hold in your hands when you're done." He picked up my ruined cutting board pieces. "This oak you wasted? That's not failure. That's learning. Start over. Do it better." I did. It took me 3 weeks, working an hour after school every day. When I finally completed it, my dad held it up to the light like it was the most valuable thing he'd ever seen. "You made that with your own hands. Nobody can take that away from you." That stuck with me. When I came home from the Gulf War in 1991, I spent a lot of time in that workshop with my dad. I couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. My dad didn't push me to talk. He just handed me tools and wood and let me work. Some nights we'd work side by side in silence for 3 hours. Those nights saved me. My dad died in 2015 from a sudden heart attack at 67. I inherited his tools, stored them in my garage, couldn't bring myself to use them for years. But his words stayed with me. When your mind's too loud, your hands need something to do. I started researching occupational therapy for PTSD. Turns out, there's significant clinical research on hands-on work for combat trauma. Working with your hands, woodworking, metalworking, mechanics, activates different brain parts than talk therapy. It creates flow state, where you're focused enough to stop ruminating, but relaxed enough to process trauma. The repetitive motions, tangible progress, quiet concentration, it's incredibly therapeutic for veterans dealing with hypervigilance and intrusive thoughts. I found VA studies about vocational programs incorporating hands-on skills training. Veterans who learned trades like carpentry showed significant improvements in PTSD symptoms, employment rates, and quality of life. The key was making it therapeutic, not just vocational. In 2019, I bought my house in Cedar Springs, Texas, 30 minutes outside Fort Worth. The property had a 30 by 40 foot detached garage that had been a woodworking shop. The moment I walked in, I saw my father's workshop, smelled that same cedar and sawdust, felt that same peace. I spent 6 months renovating: insulation, climate control, safety equipment, proper electrical. As I worked, I kept thinking about the veterans I was trying to help at the VA hospital, the ones who couldn't sit still through hour-long meetings, whose anxiety spiked in crowded rooms, who kept disappearing from programs because traditional therapy felt like admitting weakness. I wrote a proposal for a pilot program, small-scale vocational rehabilitation, providing woodworking therapy for combat veterans with PTSD, 6 to 8 participants, 3 times weekly, 3-hour sessions. We'd teach basic woodworking while creating a structured, supportive environment where veterans could work through trauma while learning marketable skills. The VA regional office approved my proposal in August 2020. They classified my workshop as a VA-approved facility under Title 38 of the U.S. Code, giving it the same federal protections as any VA medical facility. I wasn't running a hobby shop or business. I was operating a government therapy program, funded by VA grants, supervised by VA medical staff, serving VA-registered patients. I started with 4 veterans in September 2020. Staff Sergeant David Martinez, 3 tours in Afghanistan, came home with tremors so severe he couldn't write his name. Corporal Lisa Chen, Army combat medic who'd lost 2 soldiers during a firefight and hadn't slept through a night in 5 years. Sergeant First Class Marcus Williams, infantry soldier who'd lost his right leg in Fallujah and was struggling to find civilian employment. And Private First Class Tommy Rodriguez, 24 years old, watching his best friend die in a vehicle rollover and drinking himself to death, trying to forget. That first day they walked in looking how most PTSD veterans look starting treatment, wary, tense, ready to bolt. I didn't give them therapy talk. I gave them wood and tools and a simple project. Build a small box, pick your wood, measure it, cut it, sand it, assemble it. No pressure, no judgment, no timeline. For 3 hours, they barely spoke, but I watched them settle. David's hands steadied as he focused on holding the saw straight. Lisa's shoulders dropped as she got lost in sanding. Marcus figured out how to brace wood with his prosthetic while cutting. Tommy's constant fidgeting slowed down as he concentrated on fitting joints together. At the end, they had 4 small wooden boxes. Nothing fancy, rough edges, imperfect corners. But they'd made them with their own hands. David held his box like it was precious. Lisa ran her fingers over the sanded surface and smiled. First time I'd seen her smile. Marcus said, "I built something. First time since I lost my leg that I feel like I built something." Tommy didn't say anything, just kept turning his box over in his hands, examining every corner like he was looking for proof it was real. That's when I knew this would work. Over the next year, the program grew. Word spread through VA channels. 8 veterans became 12, then 16. We built birdhouses, shelves, small tables, picture frames. The workshop became their sanctuary, a place where nobody asked about trauma unless they wanted to talk, where progress was measured in inches of sanded wood, where the sounds drowned out the sounds in their heads. By spring 2021, I had documentation from VA psychologists showing measurable improvement in PTSD symptoms for program participants, reduced anxiety, better sleep, decreased depression, improved social functioning. Several veterans had used their woodworking skills to find employment. Tommy Rodriguez had been sober for 6 months and enrolled in community college. The VA regional office was thrilled. They increased funding, classified the program as a model for other regions, featured my workshop in their annual report on innovative PTSD treatments. Then Margaret Thornton moved in next door. Margaret bought the house in June 2021. She was 54, recent divorcee from Dallas, with a substantial settlement, wanting a fresh start in a quieter community. I learned later her divorce had been brutal. Her ex-husband was a real estate developer who'd left her for a younger woman after 28 years of marriage. She'd fought for everything in the settlement. Moving to Cedar Springs was supposed to be her chance to build the perfect life she felt she'd been denied. I met her the day she moved in. I was loading lumber into my truck, heading to prep materials for the week's sessions. Saturday morning, early June, already 85 degrees by 9 a.m. Margaret pulled up in her white BMW X5, designer sunglasses, tennis bracelet catching sunlight. Everything about her screamed money and control. "You must be my new neighbor," she said, walking over with a practiced smile. "Margaret Thornton. James Sullivan, welcome to the neighborhood." She glanced at the lumber in my truck, then at my workshop visible behind the house. Her smile faltered. "You're a contractor?" "Vocational rehabilitation specialist, actually. I work for the Veterans Affairs Office. I run a woodworking therapy program for combat veterans with PTSD." Her expression shifted through surprise, confusion, calculation. "Therapy? You run therapy sessions out of your home?" "Out of my workshop, yes. It's a VA-approved medical program. We teach woodworking skills to help veterans process trauma and transition to civilian employment." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "How many people?" "Usually 8 to 12 veterans per session, 3 times a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, 9 a.m. to noon." "So you have groups of people coming and going regularly? Vehicles parking on the street? Work being done in a residential area?" Her voice had taken on a sharper edge. I felt the first warning prickle. "It's a medical treatment program, Margaret. No different than if I were a therapist running counseling sessions from a home office. Actually, it's classified as a VA medical facility with federal protection." "But it's not counseling," she said coldly. "It's construction work, power tools, sawdust, noise, commercial activity in a residential zone. It's vocational therapy classified under Title 38 as a VA medical facility. It's federally protected." Margaret's smile disappeared. Her jaw tightened. "Well, we'll see about that. I didn't buy a house in a nice neighborhood to live next to some kind of industrial workshop. I paid good money for peace and quiet." "The workshop's been here for 2 years. This is a VA program serving combat veterans." "I don't care what they've sacrificed," Margaret interrupted, voice rising. "I care about my property values. I care about my investment, and I will not tolerate noise and traffic disrupting my home." She turned and walked back to her BMW, heels clicking on pavement. I stood there holding lumber, my gut telling me I'd just made an enemy. 2 weeks later, I received my first HOA violation notice. Cedar Springs Estates had an HOA, most Texas suburbs do. The violation notice arrived certified mail on a Saturday morning in July. Official HOA letterhead, signed by Margaret Thornton, compliance officer. The letter stated my property violated Covenant 7B, which prohibited commercial or industrial operations conducted from residential properties that generate excessive noise, traffic, or disruption. The notice demanded I cease all commercial woodworking operations within 30 days or face fines of $500 per day. It cited complaints about noise pollution from power tools, excessive vehicle traffic, and commercial activity inappropriate for a residential zone. I called the HOA president, Tom Mitchell, that afternoon. Tom was a retired high school principal, reasonable guy. "Tom, what is this?" "I'm not running a commercial operation. This is a VA medical program." Tom sighed. "I know, James. I tried to tell Margaret that, but she's insisting the workshop falls under commercial activity. She's been documenting everything, taking photos of vehicles, recording noise levels, talking to neighbors. Tom, these are combat veterans receiving medical treatment for PTSD. The workshop is classified as a VA facility. Federal government protects this. You need to present that case at the next HOA board meeting. Bring documentation showing it's a legitimate VA program. The HOA meeting was 2 weeks later at Tom's house. 7 board members sat around his dining room table. Margaret had arrived 20 minutes early with a wheeled briefcase full of materials. She'd prepared a 3-ring binder with tabs, photos of my workshop from every angle, vehicle counts by day and time, noise level measurements with a professional decibel meter, signed statements from 3 neighbors. She'd spent weeks preparing this attack. I presented first, explained what vocational rehabilitation meant, showed VA classification documents, shared veteran testimonials. David Martinez had written about how the workshop gave him purpose after losing his leg. Lisa Chen explained how working with wood was the first therapy that helped her sleep. I explained the Title 38 gave VA medical facilities federal protection from local zoning and HOA covenants. I showed photos of the work, birdhouses, shelves, small tables that represented massive victories for veterans learning to control trembling hands, focus fragmented minds, create something beautiful despite ugliness they'd experienced. Margaret listened with arms crossed, expression stone. She didn't look at photos of veterans, didn't read their testimonials. When I finished, she launched her counterattack with prosecutor precision. Mr. Sullivan's presentation is very moving. I'm sure his intentions are good, but it doesn't change the facts. Regardless of purpose, his workshop generates noise, traffic, and disruption that violates our community standards. These covenants exist to maintain property values for all residents, not just one person. She opened her binder. I've documented noise levels over 3 weeks. Power tools, table saws, drills, sanders operate between 85 and 95 decibels during sessions. That's equivalent to living next to a construction site 3 days a week. Tom interrupted. Margaret, those sessions are only 3 hours, 3 days a week, 9 hours total out of 168 hours weekly. 9 hours that make it impossible to enjoy my property, Margaret shot back. I work from home. I conduct client consultations via phone and video. Having power tools running next door makes my business impossible. That's economic harm caused by his operation. She flipped tabs. Vehicle count. Between 8 and 14 vehicles parked on our street during each session. Mrs. Patterson, 3 doors down, complained she couldn't have a delivery truck access her driveway last Wednesday because of vehicles parked on both sides. That happened once, I said evenly. I spoke to the veterans about parking farther down. It hasn't happened since. Margaret ignored me. If we allow one person to run industrial operations, what's next? Auto repair shops? Metal fabrication? Where do we draw the line? The covenants protect all our investments. Everyone here has hundreds of thousands of dollars in their homes. We have a right to protect those investments. Board member Carol Simpson spoke. But James has federal protection under Title 38. The VA classified this as a medical facility. I'm not ignoring it, Margaret said, voice rising slightly. I'm arguing the covenants still apply. Medical facility or not, if the activity disrupts the neighborhood, we have a right to regulate it. If a dentist wanted to see patients from his home, we'd stop him, even though dentistry is healthcare. This is no different. She was smart about it. She wasn't attacking veterans directly. That would look heartless. She was attacking logistics, noise, traffic, making it about property values and neighborhood standards, not whether veterans deserve treatment. Tom tried to find middle ground. What if we set limits? Specific hours, maximum participants, noise restrictions? The covenants already set those limits, Margaret said, and Mr. Sullivan is violating them. The solution isn't compromise. The solution is enforcement. He needs to find a commercial location. That's what businesses do. It's not a business, I said, frustration growing. These are combat veterans receiving medical treatment for PTSD. You're asking me to shut down therapy because you don't like saw sounds 3 hours a week. I'm asking you to respect community standards we all agreed to, Margaret said coldly. Your veterans can receive treatment at the VA hospital. They don't need to come to a residential neighborhood. The VA hospital is 30 miles away with a 3-month waiting list. Some of these guys don't have reliable transportation. This program is accessible, immediate, and effective. You're putting your property values above veterans' mental health." Margaret's face flushed red. "Don't you dare make this about patriotism. I support veterans. My father was a veteran. But that doesn't mean you get to violate community rules because your clients are military. The law doesn't give you special privileges." "Actually, it does," Tom said quietly. "Title 38 specifically gives VA medical facilities federal protection." The board debated for another hour. Finally, Tom called for a vote on whether to uphold the violation notice. He went around the table. Carol Simpson voted, "No, federal protection applies." Robert Chen voted no. Veterans deserve accessible treatment. David Harris voted yes. Noise is a legitimate concern. Margaret voted yes. Jennifer Martinez voted no. Federal law supersedes HOA covenants. Scott Williams voted yes. Property values need protection. Tom Mitchell cast the final vote. No, can't shut down a VA medical program. The vote split 4-3 in my favor, barely. Margaret's face went white. She gathered her materials, shoving everything into her briefcase with barely controlled fury. She left 5 minutes before the meeting ended, slamming Tom's door hard enough to rattle windows. Tom walked me to my car looking exhausted. "Watch yourself, James." Margaret doesn't lose gracefully. She'll find another angle. He was right. 2 weeks later, I received a notice from Cedar Springs Code Enforcement. Someone had filed a complaint claiming my workshop violated city zoning ordinances prohibiting commercial activity in residential zones. The city was launching an investigation. Margaret had gone around the HOA to the city itself. I contacted my VA regional supervisor, Patricia Gomez. Patricia was a 30-year VA employee, former Army nurse, one of the most competent administrators I'd ever worked with. When I explained the situation, she was furious. "This is harassment of a VA medical facility. Title 38 is very clear. Let me contact our legal office and the regional VA director." The VA moved fast. Within 48 hours, VA legal counsel had contacted Cedar Springs city attorney with a detailed letter explaining federal preemption law. When federal statutes conflict with local ordinances, federal law supersedes. My workshop was a VA-designated medical facility under Title 38, which meant city zoning ordinances didn't apply. The city dropped their investigation immediately. I thought that would end it. Margaret had tried 2 approaches, HOA and city code enforcement, and both failed because of federal protection. But Margaret Thornton wasn't the giving up type. She started showing up during workshop sessions. Not inside, she couldn't enter without trespassing, but standing at the property line, watching, taking photos, writing notes on her clipboard. The veterans noticed. David Martinez asked me one day, "Who's the woman with the clipboard?" "Just a neighbor. Don't worry about her." But the veterans did worry. That's what PTSD does. Makes you hypervigilant, makes you see threats everywhere. Having someone watching them, documenting them, made them uncomfortable. Lisa Chen stopped coming for 2 weeks because Margaret's staring triggered her anxiety. Marcus Williams said it reminded him of being surveilled during deployment. Margaret's presence was disrupting the therapy itself. I approached her one afternoon after a session. She was standing on the sidewalk, camera in hand, photographing vehicles as veterans loaded completed projects. "Margaret, what are you doing?" "Documenting commercial activity," she said, without looking at me. "Vehicles loading merchandise. That's business operation. That's veterans taking home birdhouses they built during therapy. Looks like commercial delivery to me." I felt my temper rising. "You need to stop. You're disrupting medical treatment. These are combat veterans with PTSD. Your surveillance is triggering their symptoms." Margaret finally looked at me, real anger behind her composed exterior. "Your medical treatment is destroying my property values. I paid $825,000 for my house. Do you know what living next to a woodworking facility does to resale value? I've had 3 real estate agents tell me I'd lose $100,000 or more." "Then you shouldn't have bought a house next to a VA rehabilitation specialist." "I bought a house in a residential neighborhood with HOA standards specifically designed to prevent this kind of operation. You're violating the spirit of those covenants, even if you found legal loopholes." "It's not a loophole. It's federal law protecting veterans' health care. Your federal law is costing me real money." She turned and walked back to her house. I stood there realizing this wasn't about noise or traffic anymore. This was about money. Margaret had invested heavily in her fresh start and saw my workshop as a financial threat. That's when I understood she wasn't going to stop. The next escalation, Margaret filed a civil lawsuit. Not against me personally, that would be a direct attack on a VA facility her lawyers knew would be dismissed immediately. Instead, she sued the Cedar Springs HOA itself, claiming the board had failed their fiduciary duty to enforce community covenants and protect property values by allowing my commercial operation, despite resident complaints. She was suing her own HOA for not shutting me down. The lawsuit claimed that by voting to allow my workshop, the board had violated their obligation to enforce covenants uniformly and exposed all homeowners to decreased property values. Margaret sought damages of $150,000, the amount she claimed her property value had declined, plus enforcement of the original violation notice requiring me to cease operations. Tom Mitchell called me the day the lawsuit was filed, sounding defeated. "James, I'm sorry. The HOA is going to have to hire lawyers. This is going to drag on for months." "Can't the VA intervene?" "Not in a civil suit between Margaret and the HOA. You're not a party to the case. The VA can file an amicus brief, but they can't force her to drop it." I contacted Patricia Gomez again. She brought in VA Regional Director Michael Chen and the Department of Veterans Affairs legal team. They concluded what Tom had told me. Margaret's lawsuit was strategically clever. By suing the HOA instead of me or the VA directly, she'd created a legal fight that federal preemption didn't immediately resolve. But the VA had other tools. Patricia and Michael escalated this beyond local level. They contacted congressional representatives, specifically the House Veterans Affairs Committee. They framed it clearly. A local HOA resident was using frivolous litigation to shut down a federally protected PTSD treatment program serving combat veterans. Congress pays attention when veterans' health care is threatened. Within 2 weeks, my situation was mentioned in a House Veterans Affairs Committee hearing on barriers to VA community care programs. Representative Sarah Martinez from Texas specifically cited my workshop as an example of local interference with federally protected veteran services. Then CNN called. Their Dallas bureau had picked up on the congressional testimony and wanted to do a story about HOA harassment of veteran therapy programs. A producer named Rachel Williams explained they were putting together a segment on barriers veterans face accessing mental health treatment and wanted to feature my workshop as a case study. I hesitated. Media attention felt dangerous. But Rachel made a compelling argument. "This isn't just about your workshop. This is happening all over the country. If we don't tell these stories, nobody knows it's happening." I called a special session and explained the situation to the veterans. Gave them the choice to participate or decline. No pressure either way. David Martinez spoke first. "I'll do it. People need to know what she's trying to do." Marcus Williams agreed. So did Lisa Chen. 8 veterans volunteered. They wanted to fight back. The CNN crew arrived the following week. 3 people, Rachel the producer, a cameraman, and correspondent Michael Santos. They spent 4 hours filming the workshop, interviewing veterans, capturing B-roll of wood being cut, projects being sanded, veterans working in quiet concentration. David Martinez sat with the bookshelf he'd built and told his story. Talked about Fallujah, the IED that took his leg and 2 friends, coming home feeling worthless. His voice cracked describing the depression, nightmares, how his wife had to hide car keys because she feared he'd drive off and never return. "Mr. Sullivan's workshop gave me something I hadn't felt in 3 years, David said, hand resting on the bookshelf. Purpose. The first time I finished a project, just a simple wooden box, I felt like I'd accomplished something. That matters when you've spent years watching things blow up." Marcus Williams described his daughter dying in an IED explosion in Ramadi, holding her body while medics worked frantically, the guilt eating at him daily. How PTSD made him unable to sleep, work, function. Traditional therapy hadn't worked. Medication made him numb. But the workshop gave him 3 hours weekly where his mind could quiet down. "When I'm sanding wood, that's all I'm thinking about," Marcus said. "Not my daughter, Not the explosion, just making this wood smooth. It's the only piece I get, and this woman wants to take that away because of noise. Lisa Chen talked about being a combat medic, soldiers she'd saved and lost, how every loud noise made her dive for cover, even though she'd been home 4 years. Her tremors, insomnia, inability to maintain relationships, because PTSD made her push everyone away. This workshop is the first therapy that's actually helped, Lisa said. Not sitting in an office talking about feelings, working with my hands, creating something, being around other veterans who understand. The reporter asked each veteran, "What would you say to Margaret Thornton right now?" David's answer was simple. I'd ask her if her property values are worth more than veterans' lives. Because without this program, I don't know if I'd still be alive. Marcus said, I'd tell her we already sacrificed enough. All we're asking for is 3 hours a week to learn how to live with what we've seen. If that's too much for her, she needs to examine her priorities. Lisa's response cut deeper. I'd thank her, because trying to shut down this program showed me exactly how much civilians value our service. We're heroes when they need us to fight. We're a nuisance when we come home broken. Then the reporter asked if I could facilitate an interview with Margaret. I gave them her address. They showed up that afternoon. Veterans who'd stayed to work on projects watched from my workshop as the CNN van pulled up at Margaret's house at 3:30 p.m. David Martinez texted me updates. They're knocking. She answered, sees cameras. She's trying to close the door. She's shouting. Door slammed. I called David. What happened? Reporter asked why she's trying to shut down a therapy program for PTSD veterans. Asked if she thinks property values are more important than veterans' mental health. Margaret didn't want to answer. She shouted, "No comment!" and slammed the door. But they got it all on camera. The optics were devastating. The segment aired 3 days later on CNN's Evening News at 6:47 p.m. I watched from my living room with my wife Sarah, phone already buzzing with texts from veterans watching simultaneously. The piece ran 5 minutes and was titled HOA versus Heroes, Combat Veterans, Fight to Save, PTSD Therapy Program. Michael Santos opened standing in front of my workshop. In this quiet suburban neighborhood outside Fort Worth, Texas, a battle is being fought. Not with weapons, but with legal notices and HOA complaints. And the veterans caught in the crossfire say their mental health treatment is under attack. The segment cut to David describing his injuries, Marcus talking about his daughter dying, Lisa explaining how traditional therapy failed. Footage showed veterans working peacefully, sanding wood, measuring cuts, helping each other. Then Santos explained the conflict. But one neighbor says this therapy program is actually an illegal commercial operation. Cut to exterior shots of Margaret's house, perfectly manicured lawn, expensive BMW. The segment showed clips from Margaret's doorstep. The footage was damning. Margaret's face filled with anger as she saw cameras, voice sharp. "This is private property. You need to leave." Santos off camera, professional. "Ms. Thornton, why are you trying to shut down a therapy program for PTSD veterans?" Margaret's response shouted as she pushed the door. "I have no comment. Get off my property." The door slam echoed. Camera held on the closed door for 2 seconds. Then cut back to Santos. Margaret Thornton declined to comment, but in legal filings, she argues the workshop generates excessive noise and traffic that harms her property values. The segment concluded with David's final statement. I'd ask her if her property values are worth more than veterans' lives. Santos's closing line. While these combat veterans work to rebuild their lives 3 hours a week, one neighbor is working to shut down the program that's helping them heal. My phone exploded. Within minutes, dozens of texts, Facebook flooding with shares, Twitter erupted with hashtag Margaret versus PTSD. Reddit's military subreddits picked it up instantly. By 8 p.m., the segment had 200,000 YouTube views. By midnight, over 1 million. Conservative military outlets shared it. Liberal veteran advocacy groups shared it. People who agreed on nothing else agreed Margaret Thornton was wrong. The comments were brutal. Thousands calling her heartless, unpatriotic, selfish. Veterans sharing their own HOA harassment stories. Gold Star families condemning her. HOA board members from other states commenting they'd never shut down a veterans program. Margaret's Facebook page was discovered within hours. People flooded it with comments. Her interior design business page got bombarded with one-star reviews. Someone found her LinkedIn and started messaging her contacts. By the next morning, the story had gone national. Fox News ran a segment. MSNBC covered it. Local news stations nationwide picked it up. The Dallas Morning News ran a front-page article. International outlets, BBC, Reuters, Al Jazeera, ran stories about the Texas HOA trying to shut down PTSD therapy. The Veterans of Foreign Wars released a statement condemning Margaret's actions. The American Legion issued their own statement. Disabled American veterans organized a petition. It gathered 150,000 signatures in 48 hours. Margaret's life became a nightmare. Her website crashed from traffic. Local businesses asked her not to return. Someone spray-painted "Veteran Hater" on her driveway at 3 a.m. She couldn't go to the grocery store without being recognized and confronted. Tom Mitchell called me 4 days after the segment aired. Margaret dropped her lawsuit. Her lawyer filed dismissal this morning. It's over. Relief washed over me. Did she say why? Her legal fees were approaching $30,000, and she had zero chance of winning once this became national news. Her lawyer advised her to cut losses. Has she said anything directly? Tom hesitated. She submitted her HOA board resignation yesterday. She's also putting her house on the market. I think she's leaving Cedar Springs. I felt a strange mix. Relief, the legal threat was over. Sadness it had come to this. No satisfaction watching someone's life implode, even someone who'd tried to destroy what I'd built. Tom, I never wanted this. I know, but she made choices. She could have visited your workshop, met the veterans, tried to understand. Instead, she decided to destroy it. Actions have consequences. Margaret listed her house at $799,000 2 weeks later. No offers. She dropped the price to $749,000 after a month, then $699,000. The market in Cedar Springs was strong, but nobody wanted to buy the house where the woman who attacked veterans lived. She finally accepted an offer of $710,000 4 months later, $115,000 less than she'd paid 18 months earlier. The realtor told me Margaret had been crying during closing, that she'd lost more than money. She'd lost her fresh start, her reputation, her control. I never spoke to her again. I saw her once more the day the moving truck came. She loaded her BMW, watched movers carry furniture, got in her car, and drove away without looking back. Someone told me she moved to Phoenix and started over with a new business under a different name. I don't know if that's true. Margaret Thornton became a cautionary tale, a viral villain, a symbol of HOA overreach. That's her legacy now. But the story didn't end with her departure. The media attention brought unexpected benefits. Donations poured in from veterans organizations, military families, civilians who'd seen the segment. Within 2 months, I'd received over $85,000 through GoFundMe someone had set up. A veterans motorcycle club raised $12,000 at a charity ride. A retired general wrote a $5,000 check with a note, "Keep fighting for our brothers and sisters." Patricia Gomez convinced me to accept. People want to help. Let them. Use it to expand the program, buy better equipment, help more veterans. I used the donations to transform the workshop. I purchased industrial-grade equipment, cabinet-grade table saw, professional jointer, drum sander. I installed better ventilation and dust collection. I bought enough hand tools that every veteran could have their own set. I built storage for materials and projects. I hired Tommy Rodriguez, one of my original veterans who'd completed the program and gone sober, as a part-time assistant instructor at $20 an hour. The VA regional office saw my workshop as a model for community-based veteran care. Patricia brought VA regional director Michael Chen to visit. He was a former Navy corpsman who'd served 2 tours in Iraq. He understood PTSD from personal experience. After spending 4 hours watching veterans work and reviewing my therapeutic outcome documentation, he sat with me in my workshop office. "This is what we should be doing everywhere," Michael said. "Not just Fort Worth. Every major city with veteran populations needs programs like yours." Within 6 months, the VA had allocated funding for 3 pilot programs modeled on mine. Houston launched a welding therapy program. San Antonio started automotive repair. Austin created metalworking. Each followed my template: hands-on skills training combined with therapeutic support, small groups, community-based, accessible. The House Veterans Affairs Committee took notice. Representative Sarah Martinez from Texas cited my workshop during a committee hearing on community-based PTSD treatment. She introduced the Veterans Community Care Expansion Act, allocating $50 million for vocational therapy programs for combat veterans outside traditional VA hospitals. The bill passed with bipartisan support in 2022. That legislation changed everything for veterans' mental health care. Suddenly, community-based programs had federal funding, official recognition, strengthened legal protections. Woodworking, automotive repair, construction skills, culinary arts, all became legitimate, funded, protected therapy for veterans needing alternatives to traditional counseling. My workshop became a training site. VA employees from other regions came to learn how to set up similar programs. I developed curriculum manuals, created training materials, mentored new instructors. The program I'd started in my garage to help 12 veterans had become a blueprint for helping thousands. The most important changes were the individual veterans whose lives transformed. David Martinez completed my program after 18 months. His hands still trembled sometimes, but he could control them well enough for precision work. He got hired by a high-end furniture maker in Fort Worth, building custom cabinets for luxury homes. Last I heard, he was making $28 an hour plus benefits, had moved into his own apartment, was dating someone from a veteran support group. He sends me photos of his work: beautiful cabinets with dovetail joints, hand-rubbed finishes, craftsmanship that would make my father proud. Marcus Williams stayed in the program for 2 years. His daughter's death had carved a hole in him that couldn't be filled, but woodworking gave him a way to live with that emptiness. He started building memorial boxes for other veterans, small wooden boxes engraved with names of fallen soldiers, personalized for families who'd lost someone in combat. He's made over 200 boxes now, ships them to Gold Star families across the country, charges nothing. It's his way of honoring his daughter and helping other families grieve. Lisa Chen graduated after a year and enrolled in community college respiratory therapy. She's working at a Dallas hospital now, helping patients breathe easier. Redemption for someone who'd spent years unable to breathe easy herself. She still stops by occasionally, just to sand wood for an hour, to reconnect with the peace she'd found here. Tommy Rodriguez, my assistant instructor, has been sober for 4 years. He finished his construction management degree, got certified as a general contractor, runs his own small construction business building decks and additions. He still works with me part-time because teaching other veterans gives him purpose. He tells new participants about his journey from alcoholic who couldn't keep a job to business owner with employees. His story gives them hope. The program keeps growing. The waiting list grew to 40 names, then 60, then 80. I capped enrollment at 16 participants per cycle, running 5 days a week now instead of 3. Morning sessions 9 a.m. to noon, afternoon sessions 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. I brought in Dr. Sarah Gonzalez, a VA psychologist, to conduct group therapy sessions monthly, integrating talk therapy with hands-on work, creating holistic treatment. Today my workshop is still running. I'm 51 years old, and I'll probably keep doing this until I can't hold a saw steady anymore. The veterans who come through here don't just learn woodworking. They learn that trauma doesn't define them, that they can create something beautiful even when their hands shake, that there are still people who care about what they sacrificed, that healing isn't linear, isn't always comfortable, but is possible with the right support. Some go on to careers in construction or carpentry. Others just take the therapeutic benefit and move forward. Either way, they leave with something solid they built themselves, proof they're more than their wounds, more than their diagnoses, more than the worst things they've seen. Here's what I want people to understand. Margaret Thornton wasn't unique. She was ordinary. Across this country right now, there are HOAs filing complaints against veterans with PTSD service dogs, city councils trying to shut down veteran support programs because of parking complaints, neighborhood groups protesting transitional housing for homeless veterans because it might affect property values, individuals filing noise complaints against veteran motorcycle clubs and memorial ceremonies. They're not monsters. They're ordinary people who see inconvenience before sacrifice, who see property values before PTSD, who see noise violations before wounded warriors trying to heal. They file complaints with clean consciences, convinced they're protecting their investments, maintaining community standards, exercising their rights as property owners. What they don't see is that the men and women receiving those services gave up years of their lives, their physical health, sometimes their mental well-being, to protect the freedoms that allow HOAS to exist. These veterans didn't ask for PTSD. They didn't ask for traumatic brain injuries or lost limbs or nightmares that never stop. They got those things serving their country, and now they're trying to rebuild their lives with whatever support they can find. If a woodworking workshop 3 hours a week bothers you more than the thought of veterans suffering alone, examine your priorities. If a therapy dog or service animal or memorial flagpole feels like an imposition on your lifestyle, think hard about what you actually value. If you see veteran support programs as threats to property values instead of lifelines for people who've sacrificed everything, ask yourself what kind of person you want to be. Because veterans have allies. We have federal laws protecting us. We have advocacy organizations with resources and lawyers. We have media outlets that love stories where Goliath attacks wounded warriors. We have millions of Americans who may disagree on politics, but agree that veterans deserve support. When you attack a veteran therapy program, you're not just fighting one person. You're fighting the entire veteran community, their families, their supporters, and everyone who believes people who served deserve better than harassment over noise complaints. That doesn't mean every veteran program should be exempt from all rules. If I was genuinely violating laws, disrupting the neighborhood 24/7, creating legitimate safety hazards, that would be different. Reasonable people can have reasonable disagreements about where to draw lines. But Margaret's crusade wasn't about reasonable concerns. It was about control, about money, about refusing to tolerate minor inconveniences for veterans' mental health. She could have visited the workshop, could have met the veterans, could have tried to understand before trying to destroy. She chose differently, and she paid the price. My workshop is still here. The veterans are still coming. We're still building things, both in wood and in healing. The table saw still hums, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. The smell of cedar and sawdust still fills the air. Veterans still arrive with trembling hands and leave with projects they built themselves. David Martinez recently completed a rocking chair for his first grandchild. He spent 3 months on it, sanding until it was smooth enough for infant skin, finishing with non-toxic oils, carving the baby's name into the back. When he delivered it, he cried. Told me it was the first time he'd cried tears of joy since before Fallujah. Marcus Williams is working on memorial box number 247. This one's for a Marine who died in Syria in 2019. The Marine's mother sent him photos, stories about who her son was before deployment. Marcus spent weeks selecting wood, getting the engraving perfect, finishing it with care that understands this box will hold memories of someone's entire life. Lisa Chen stopped by last month to help with group therapy. She talked to new veterans about her journey from combat medic who couldn't sleep to respiratory therapist helping patients breathe. Told them healing isn't about forgetting what you've seen. It's about learning to carry those memories without letting them crush you. About finding meaning in the aftermath, purpose in the pain, connection with people who understand what you've survived. Tommy Rodriguez just hired his first employee, a veteran from our program who completed certification and needed a job. Tommy's teaching him the same way I taught Tommy. Patience, precision, respect for the work. The cycle continues, veterans helping veterans, building things that matter, creating community in the wreckage of trauma. This is what Margaret tried to destroy. This network of healing and support and practical help for people who've served and paid prices most civilians can't imagine. And she failed. We're still here, still building, still healing, still helping veterans find their way home from wars that never really end. If you're dealing with HOA harassment targeting veteran services, don't stay silent. Document everything. Contact your VA regional office. Reach out to veteran advocacy organizations, VFW, American Legion, Disabled American Veterans. They have legal resources and political connections. File complaints with congressional representatives. Contact local media. Tell your story. And if you're a veteran struggling with PTSD, know this. There are programs that can help. Not just traditional therapy in VA hospitals, though that works for some, but also community-based programs like mine, where healing looks different than sitting in an office. Sometimes healing looks like building a bookshelf with hands that haven't stopped shaking since Kandahar. Sometimes it looks like sanding wood until your mind quiets enough to sleep. Sometimes it looks like creating something beautiful in a workshop that smells like cedar and sawdust and possibility. Whatever healing looks like for you, it's worth fighting for. It's worth protecting. It's worth defending against people who value their convenience more than your well-being. My father told me once that when your mind's too loud, your hands need something to do. That therapy you can hold in your hands when you're done is worth more than any property value, any HOA covenant, any noise complaint. He was right, and I'll keep proving him right, one veteran at a time, one project at a time, for as long as I'm able to hold a saw steady and help someone find peace in the work. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up for veterans' rights and pushing back against people who try to shut down programs that save lives. Share this with anyone who needs to understand that attacking veterans' healthcare has consequences. And if you know a veteran struggling with PTSD, tell them there are people who care, programs that work, and workshops like mine across the country waiting to help them heal. The workshop door is still open, the saw is still humming, the veterans are still coming, and we're still here, still building, still healing, still refusing to let anyone tell us that property values matter more than veterans' lives.